Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Now that the global banking system is entering its end game of collapse, Stacey and I are going to London to enter the belly of the beast, as it were. We want front row seats as London, the epicenter of global banking fraud, finally and ultimately collapses under the weight of its own fraud. Stacey Herbert.
Max, that's right. We're heading into London where we'll try out some new ideas. We'll put Max Keiser in the street where he might encounter some of these banksters. We'll have some more in-studio guests. We're going to try some new stuff with William Bonsai 7, all new studio. But, of course, we will bring some protection from the London disease.
Well, we're launching a new Silver Keiser in a couple of weeks as well. So that'll be great to fight the banksters face to face.
So, this London disease features in this first headline, Max. Opinion, bailed out banks facilitate $21 trillion of offshore cash hoard. So this is investigative economist James Henry in a report, Price of Offshore Revisited. And this came out in July. But it's really important to us as we head into London because he found that between $21 and $32 trillion of financial assets owned by high net worth individuals, or I like to call them henwe, in tax havens, and it doesn't include real estate, art, or jewels.
Right. No, this is just money that's parked in various accounts outside of the visible system. It's part of what they call the shadow banking system, the dark matter, then dark energy of the global financial system. It's where the global multi-hundred trillion dollar drug money is active as well. But again, it's all roads lead to London. That's the crossroads.
This is what the next bit here says, is that most of the money is actually held in the center of this offshore world is actually the UK. And that includes Jersey, Isle of Man, Cayman Islands, British Virgin Island. Of course, the Cayman Islands is the favorite of perhaps the next president of the United States, Mitt Romney. And the article says, quote, the UK is arguably the center of the offshore world. Now, it says a lot of this facilitation of this debt to these offshore tax haven is helped by the too big to fail banks. They're the ones that move this money for the likes of Mitt Romney. It's the too big to fail banks that were bailed out. But the article calls them a unique thing here, I think. It says that they're so too big to fail that they're actually too big to be true.
Right. This is an interesting point. The banks, it's not that they're too big to fail, it's that they're too big to exist. There's no business model that they could be involved with that would support that size that they claim to be. They are all flow, no assets. They are kind of like Sasquatch, the Bigfoot of the forest. They're cited occasionally at an annual meeting, vaguely through the shadows and fog of trumped up quarterly reports, or it could be like Paul Bunyan. He's an American myth, isn't he? The giant lumberjack. These are the giant banks that actually are mythical. They don't exist because they couldn't possibly exist. You know, you can't, physically impossible, economically impossible. There's 600 trillion in derivatives around the world that they're engaged in over a quadrillion in transactions. The Earth itself only has 50 trillion in GDP. So clearly these things are part of the imaginary banking hologram that exists only in the minds of a few ideologue crackpots.
They're too big to be true in a real economy that most people live in. If they were really doing just ordinary banking, they would not be so big. They would not have $32 trillion in offshore assets. If they were just minding their business about being a bank, they're not. However, they're part of a cartel. They're laundering money, as you say, drug money, terrorist money, all sorts of money from the black economy in the black markets.
Right. Well, not only are these banks now entering the final phase of their destruction, as you know, in Star Wars, of course, the Death Star ultimately blew up, didn't it? But it's also the collapse of the fiat money system, which has been part of the growth of these imaginary Paul Bunyan type Sasquatch banks that don't really exist in reality. And again, this is why we see evidence of this again in gold and silver that are beginning to discount now not only total failure in the banking system, but total failure in the global fiat money system.
So this report calls it the London disease as well. So not only is the UK, the square mile, the city of London, but also all of their various islands, Isle of Man, Jersey, and the Cayman Islands, the center of all this wealth being laundered. But, quote, it has not gone unnoticed that many of the financial scandals in recent years have a square mile connection.
Yeah, no, this is the Bermuda Triangle of global fraud. Billions of dollars go into this square mile of the city of London and poof, disappear. We don't know where it all goes. And they call it the London disease. But I think have some stiff competition from alcoholism on that one.
To go over a few of the big scandals of just the last 3 or 4 years. AIG. $80 billion of U.S. taxpayer money thrown into that black hole in the city of London. Lehman Brothers. Madoff. The London Whale, JP Morgan's London Whale. MF Global. All of these happened via London. They couldn't happen elsewhere.
No, that's exactly right. We've been saying this for months, for years. Now, finally, people are beginning to realize. I think the MF Global was really what tripped it off. Finally, they said, why are all the major bank frauds always in the city of London? In the city of London, of course, is the only place in the world, in the banking world, where you can rehypothecate to infinity. Even in the U.S., which is corrupt, you can only rehypothecate 140% of, let's say, an underlying marginal bull security like a U.S. government treasury bond. But in London, you can do it infinity. You can sell the same bond in London an infinite number of times. Gee, I wonder if that could lead to fraud.
And by the way, regarding this London disease and acting as a sort of haven for all sorts of ill-gotten gains from around the world, I do notice in the FT recently, luxury homes boom in London. That, of course, is a way to launder your cash and keep it safe from your own governments back home.
Well, this is the great thing about this particular heist that's gone on with the help of the central bankers. They have been able to boost asset prices through the inflation that comes with massive money printing to bail out the banks, while simultaneously avoiding any wage growth. See, in the past cycles of inflation, you had both asset prices and wages increase. But the financial engineers in the city of London, principally, and in New York, they figured out how to use derivatives to change the course of the flow of funds so that it only goes into luxury homes, artwork, yachts, and other stuff, and completely avoids the labor markets. Genius!
Now, speaking of flow of funds and the London disease, they meet in this headline from The Private Eye, where Max Keiser was first discovered.
That's right. We were discovered in The Private Eye 5 or 6 years ago. They picked up on a campaign we were doing, and that's set in motion our television enterprise.
It was actually 7 or 8 years ago, but they have a headline right now, Made Off Men. It's Private Eye issue 1321, and the article is obviously about the London-enabled multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme operator Bernie Madoff and a certain London bank that aided and abetted him. And they're noting that there's a new lawsuit in America which is showing that HSBC funneled 1/3 of all of Bernard Madoff's Ponzi scheme funds. That's $8.9 billion without proper checks or balances.
Right. They use this sophisticated network of feeder funds. So if you give your private banker, you have clients, and the private banker will say, put your money into our new Strategic Advantage Bio-Duloop Exo Facto Fund number 9. And they don't tell you that it's just a label, a white label you could call it, put onto the Bernie Madoff enterprise of Ponzi scheming. And they do this many times. They're all feeding into this one main river of fraud called Bernie Madoff. The reason why they have so many different funds and so many different names for so many different funds and so many different feeder funds is so they can sell the same customer the same thing over and over again. So the same high net worth individual will be saying, oh, I've got 15 funds, and they name them all in their statement. 10 of those funds could be just different names for the same fund, which is called the Bernie Madoff Fraud Fund.
In this particular case, so the feeder funds feeding through HSBC were actually marketing their material to high net worth individuals, Henwees, across Europe. Using the HSBC logo was emblazoned on their marketing material. So, of course, they're thinking, here's a bank from 1865, formed during the original Opium Wars. So maybe, maybe they're able to launder my cash risk-free for the next few hundred years of drug wars.
Right. HSBC name and logo is used to legitimize fraud. The bank knows it. The bank knew it. It's the same way that Moody's, S&P, and Fitch used a AAA rating bond rating to legitimize bonds that were sold to Greece that were worthless, that bonds sold all over Europe that were worthless, bonds sold all over America, collateralized debt obligations, mortgage-backed security bonds that they knew were worthless, but they put the AAA rating on it. They're part of a fraud. They're part of a syndicate. They're part of a racket. So HSBC is a racketeer for 150 years. This is one of the dirtiest banks of them all.
Well, you say they knew, and this is what they're charging in this lawsuit in America, that KPMG actually wrote 2 reports for HSBC, one in 2006 and one in 2008. The title of the reports, quote, Review of Fraud Risk and Related Operational Risks at Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. So pretty clear what they're looking at. One of the reports warned that allowing Bernie to be a custodian of the funds while also managing them created potential that the trades were, quote, a sham in order to divert client cash.
Right. There's the broker-dealer conflict. In other words, he's both making a market as well as he's also brokering interest in that market, that he's a principal in that market. It's the same thing when you go to one of these money exchange booths anywhere in the world. It'll say no commission, no commission. Well, because they're acting as a broker and a principal, they say, well, we're marking it up to you by 20%. But we're, as a dealer, you see, we don't have to declare that markup as a commission because we're a dealer, we're a market maker. And Lloyd Blankfein uses this excuse all the time to hide the fraud at Goldman Sachs. They'll say, Lloyd Blankfein, why did you commit that massive fraud? And he'll say, well, we're a market maker. We're a market maker. What's he saying? He's saying that we don't have to declare to the extent of our fraud because we're in this completely and perfectly conflicted position of being both a broker and a dealer. Okay, Stacey Hibbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York and talk to author, historian, and investigative journalist Leah McGrath Goodman. Leah is author of The Asylum, The Renegades Who Hijacked the World's Oil Market. Leah, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me, Max.
So, Leah McGrath Goodman, you've been banned from entering the UK due to your investigative reporting into sex crimes in Jersey. Now, before we get to that story, let's talk about Jersey. What exactly is Jersey? Go ahead, Leah.
Well, Jersey is an island, the largest island in the Channel Islands, and it's a peculiar possession of the British Crown. It is the largest offshore tax center in the world, has more money in it than any other, and it's a very secretive island. It runs itself as a parliamentary democracy under a constitutional monarchy. It's very complicated, but technically Britain has legal ties to it, but it runs itself.
Right. Now, it's recently been estimated that up to 32 trillion or more is held offshore by various entities. Any idea what percentage of that runs through Jersey?
Jersey stows a great deal of money, but nobody knows exactly how much. In all of the UK, it's $2 trillion, and Jersey is the leading territory. So I think conservatively, it's about $5 billion per square mile in Jersey. It's a 4 by 9 mile island. It's very small.
Okay. Now, Leah, we've seen Switzerland bombarded with investigations and financial threats from the U.S. Does Jersey receive similar treatment?
No, actually, so really officially the Swiss star is fading and the UK is sort of becoming a lot more prominent in terms of being a tax shelter destination. I'm not sure if that's part of the special relationship between the US and the UK, that the UK will be more favored than the Swiss. But Switzerland has really suffered and the UK has been doing better and better in relation. And they both have about $2 trillion, so they're neck and neck.
Now, Leah, no matter how wretched the crime, the elites always circle the wagons when there's an income stream at stake. We saw this during the sex scandal at Penn State University. We see this with LIBOR. So tell us about the wagon in which you were encircled. What happened when you arrived at Heathrow Airport?
Well, I was researching Jersey for a while, a couple years, and at the time that I got property over there, I met with immigration to just make sure that my affairs were in order, and they said that they were. But when they found out what I was researching, they flagged me. They didn't tell me. And the next time I crossed the border, I was imprisoned underneath Heathrow Airport, and they went through all of my things. They refused to give me a lawyer or let me call my consulate. All my rights were taken away from me, and then they sent me back to the United States. I still have not gotten a straight answer as to why.
Right, now let's talk about the story itself. Basically, the story that you're covering, sex crimes in Jersey, correct? Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, probably to be more accurate, Jersey has a really polished international reputation as a tax haven, but internally it has a lot of political problems ever since scandals involving an orphanage in 2008, where it seems that for decades children were allegedly tortured, raped, murdered, and there were many victims who are still alive who can tell their stories very clearly. They're being completely ignored, and my feeling is that it does need to be investigated more thoroughly, and they need to be able to speak their truth. Everyone who has come near this particular scandal to look into it, from the policemen to the health minister, have all been either driven off the island or thrown out of their jobs. It's been very bad, and it seems like there's a big effort to try to keep eyes away.
Okay, so this is shaping up to be really quite a scandal. It has all of the underhanded and disgusting sex crimes of a Penn State football team story, combined with the underhanded market rigging of LIBOR. Now, how high up does this cover-up go? And if there was somebody or an entity or an authority in place to stop the crimes, both the child abuse and the financial abuse, who would be that entity? What's the jurisdiction there in Jersey?
Well, Jersey is really interesting. It's almost like a special purpose vehicle of the Crown. So the Crown can be more or less as associated as it wants to be with Jersey or as not. So effectively, the Queen could step in, but of course just really doesn't ever do that. And so Jersey runs itself more or less. That said, the head of the police, all of the police in Jersey, and the sort of the diplomatic head of police, he was told while he was investigating this orphanage by those running the government that the chief minister in particular said, "You don't understand, this could bring the entire British government down." So I assume it goes very high, and that there are strong reasons why they don't want people looking into it. But again, until I'm allowed back into the UK to investigate it, I'm not going to know, and the world isn't going to really know whatever happened to these poor children.
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of the jurisdiction, in terms of the regulators covering these various jurisdictions. We know that the City of London, for example, like Washington, D.C. or the Vatican, is its own city-state, which really answers to authorities that are tied to regimes that are outside of the countries in which these entities exist. Here, Jersey sounds like it's in even more embedded, within the system, where sounds virtually impossible for any kind of regulatory imposition at all. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's so insular. It's a strange place in the sense that the people, just to be clear, it's a little island about 12 miles off France, so it's right in the English Channel between England and France. And to get there, you have to fly. To call there, it costs like $5 a minute to call there from North America. The people on the island are very closed off, and a lot of them don't even know a lot of what's going on. Books are banned on this democratic island. Materials are kept away. The press is more or less controlled by the government. There are bloggers on the island who try to keep people informed, but they are starting to go after the bloggers under what they're calling the Data Protection Act, and it's a way to basically gag them to keep them from being able to talk about what's happening. So there's a huge onus on trying to make sure that information is not revealed, even to the people who live there. And for democracy, I think in a Western democracy, it's unprecedented. They have spared no expense in trying to keep things very, very under wraps.
Right. Well, the British media establishment and their relationship to restrictions on journalists in their own country and in other countries. This seems to be a growing issue that's shaping geopolitics. Certainly you have a journalist like Julian Assange caught in the UK, but it now is reverberating throughout the entire world with countries convening meetings to discuss what's happening with his curtailment of freedom of speech. Here you are down in the Jersey island. You're being basically shut out from covering any kind of story. The British establishment seems to be split. They don't really seem as though they want any kind of investigative journalism at all anymore. Is that your perception?
Well, it's been very strange. It's hard to see exactly what's happening. I know that when the BBC interviewed me about this recently in The Guardian this summer, when they found out I was banned, what ended up happening was Jersey said, "Ms. Goodman, we invite you to come back to the island." They have not removed my ban, but they are publicly stating that I'm welcome to come back even though I'm still banned. And the UK says, Jersey is not letting me come. Jersey says the UK is not letting me come. So you can see how they can kind of toss it back and forth and try to create confusion for someone who's just trying to do the right thing.
Right. And where does the investigation stand today?
So right now, the investigation into the orphanage was shut down very abruptly. The police were moved from the island. One of them was suspended twice. And the senator who has tried to stick up for the victims has been jailed twice. He's destitute, and he's still fighting. He's trying to take the case to London and see if maybe he can get the UK to get more involved in the affairs of the island. Some of the people involved here feel the rule of law has completely broken down, where the judicial system and the legislative system have more or less been hijacked, really to carry out the will of just a few people at the very top. The islanders themselves are very nice people. A lot of them are very devastated by what's happening, but they feel powerless to do anything. The voting rate on the island is very low, and it's a small, very sleepy sort of farming culture with this financial services overlay. So when you're there, it almost feels like there's nothing happening. It's just yachts and diamonds and champagne lounges. It's a very deceiving place with a dark side. So I think, until a journalist can come in and look at the facts, or someone else in England is going to do more, this thing will just continue.
All right, now, Leah McGrath Goodman, of course, your book, The Asylum, The Renegades Who Hijacked the World's Oil Market, really went into depth discussing how the essentially oil futures markets in New York were taken over by a band of rogue traders, and this is what is driving the global market. Now, since that book has come out, we've seen revelations about similar types of behavior by rogue participants in things like the LIBOR scandal or in the London whale that was supposed to be trading a hedged position but was trading an unhedged position, caused a massive loss for JP Morgan. The culture itself, is it in any way being curtailed, this kind of psychotic bot-driven rogue trading mentality that's destroying the global financial world, or is it increasing? Your thoughts?
Oh, that's a good question. The main thing is we're looking at what I specialize in, and all the things that you and I usually talk about, Max, are more or less institutionalized cultures of corruption, right? So there's usually a culture of wealthy people that are trying to defend that culture of corruption, and then they're the victims of them. So is it spreading? I think the problem is we're seeing a lot more shoring up of wealth amongst those who already have a lot of wealth. So as long as they can throw infinite amounts of money, in particular Jersey with all of its money, they have the ability to throw infinite amounts of money at defending their own actions, no matter how awful. So if you have all that money, it's very hard for journalists like you and I can do things, but we really need to get the word out when these things are happening, when it's a very broad thing with lots of damage. In this case with Jersey, we're dealing with some of the most appalling crimes known to humanity, the torture and rape of children, and that the fact that an entire government would just look the other way instead of dealing with it is very sad.
Well, what you're describing here, it sounds like Jersey has become like a medieval fortress surrounded by a moat, run by a mad king who's bent on torturing and raping while looting the country. And this is a model we're seeing replicated throughout the world now, isn't it? As the global financial system cracks apart. Austerity is being imposed. Countries like Greece are on the verge of open revolt and civil war. So we're seeing kind of a return. Some call it a return to feudalism and neo-feudalism. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Is this a return to feudalism? In the case of the Channel Islands, which is, they're all still very feudal the way they are run. So in a way, they never stop being feudal. But in terms of, other parts of the world where we're seeing the great concentrations of wealth resulting in a really large underclass developing, yes, there's a possibility that we could start to see more feudal tendencies. And it's something people should at least be talking about.
Okay. Well, Leah McGrath Goodman, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Leah McGrath Goodman. She's the author of The Asylum, The Renegades Who Hijacked the World's Oil Market. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.